Hey, we thank you for listening today to 88.1 FM, KBAP, the very best in modern praise and worship. Here in the studio, aka Charlie's Kitchen, and we're just hanging out, talking bicycle stuff, and talking about George Soros, talking about the price of silver and gold, just talking about a bunch of different things, and I want to turn it over to Charlie to get us started, and I'm not sure where Charlie's going to go.
Okay.
We'll just get
I've got
right
one thing I want to talk about first. I'm going to go on a little tirade. You know, I love to do that.
Yeah.
Arkansas has this, of course, we live in Arkansas. I don't know that everybody that listens to us is in Arkansas. But I'm going to bet that every state and the federal government has something similar to what Arkansas has. And it's a fund that the governor gets, and he can distribute this money out to various state senators and state representatives that he'd like to see get reelected. And they can take this money, and it's to help their districts.
Wow.
You know, it's grant money. And
Yeah.
it could be a grant to help the Humane Society or a local fire department or a local school district or you name it, a museum, the county fair. It goes on and on. I mean, there is no end to what this money can be used for. And basically, it's the way that incumbent state representatives and state senators, and I think it's probably true for incumbent U.S. senators and U.S. congressmen, it's the way they use tax money to get themselves reelected. They can take this money.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
That sounds totally corrupt to me.
It's all legal. It can't be corrupt. It's legal.
Yeah. That doesn't seem right at all.
Well, Tony, you're the kind of guy that might say killing an innocent child is corrupt.
I am.
But it's perfectly legal, so there can't be anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
That's where we are as a society, Tony.
Wow.
It is totally, perfectly legal. It is corrupt. It is the most corrupt, vile thing, other than killing innocent babies. But that's the way it works. And so these state representatives and senators...
How do you change that? How do you change that?
I guess it'd take a law. I think we should have a law that says...
So no one's going to write the law because it works against
it works against them, right. But I think we should have a law that says no government entity shall under any circumstances provide money to another governmental entity or to, tax money ought to go to do what tax money is supposed to do. And here's the argument. Well, how can you say it's bad to give a grant to a volunteer fire department? I mean, we all love our fire departments, don't we?
Yeah.
It's hard to say, oh, well, that's bad to help the fire department.
Well, I thought you were saying that the grant money was going to politicians. Oh, you're saying that the politicians can say, look what I've done for my district.
Right. And
so the incumbents, they get, like the new guy can't say that because
right.
the new guy doesn't have access to the money.
Yeah, and I ran, and I can remember putting a sign up in somebody's yard. And this person said, oh, yeah, you sound really great to me. And the guy I was running against is like the polar opposite to me.
Yeah.
But this guy was a police officer, and, oh, well, the other guy got a grant for our department, so get your sign out of here, I'm putting his up.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it works. I mean, that happened to me.
Yeah.
And it's as wrong as, it's totally immoral. Let me just say this. If it is wrong for one person to steal from another person, it is equally wrong for government to steal from the taxpayers and give to specific individuals. And that's mainly what government does today. That the main function of government today is to act as a thief.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the role of government is something that there's probably an amazing spectrum of opinions on that.
Oh, yeah.
From very limited government to much more aggressive.
Yeah. I think most people today would say, oh, well, that's good. But I've asked several legislators, well, do you think that government should help people? Oh, yeah, we think government should help people. Well, see, I don't believe it's a proper function of government to help people. Because if you use government to help one person, the only possible way you can do that is use government to hurt someone else. Because what you give to one person, you take from another. And basically, why are we doing this? We're not doing it to help anybody. We're doing it to buy votes.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. And, you know, there's a scripture in the Old Testament that says, the people love lying prophets, people that tell them lies.
Right.
And, you know, that's where we are as a people. We love politicians that lie to us. Now, we would all say, oh, no.
No, we don't.
We don't like politicians that lie. But we really do.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not going to name any names. You can if you want to. But we know there are politicians running for office that have made a career of being liars. And they still have broad-based support. And why is it? Because we as, and this is the main issue that I want to get to. Our problem is not our politicians. You know, it's not that the politicians are doing everything wrong. The politicians are doing what the people want. We want our politicians to lie to us. We want our politicians to be thieves because we think theft is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're on the receiving end of being stolen from, you don't think it's a good thing. But if you're on the
No, you said that backwards.
Yeah, if you're the one being robbed, obviously you think, well, hey, forget that. You know, if your tax liability is huge, you're thinking, man, I'm thinking about moving to Ireland. That's just fine.
Something's rattling.
Your coffee pot.
Oh, okay. I wondered what I was
Yeah,
saying.
your coffee pot's finishing its thing over there.
Okay.
But, you know, if you're the one that's getting the money, no one seems to have a problem with that. You know, if you're on the, tax that big, rich, fat cat.
Yeah.
You know, stick it to him. Yeah, I need food stamps or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to dog on people that don't have things, but, I mean, you know, I've thought often about the role of government and the role of the church. You know, being a pastor, I think about what would happen if people had a much lower tax liability. They could have more money, discretionary income, to donate to the local church to really help people.
Yeah.
And I think one of the roles of the church is to help people.
Absolutely.
I don't necessarily think it's the only role or the main role, but I think it's, you know, I was overhearing some ladies talking at Anytime Fitness this morning. They were over there on the elliptical trainers, you know, doing their thing, and they were talking about a food bank that they had at their church, and this one lady was so excited about being able to help people, and I thought, I was thinking about our food bank and how we help people and the role of the church, and, you know, how Jesus said you'll always have the poor with you and all that. But, yeah, I'm with you, Charlie, on the concept or the idea of in order to help somebody, you got to take the money from somebody else, which, if you want to get real technical about it, it is stealing.
Now, and let's be honest here, okay? If you're middle class or poor, do you think you really have the ability to lobby the government to get the government to steal a whole lot and give to you? Who's got the ability to get the government to steal the most and give it to them? Isn't it the rich?
Yeah.
And it's not that the stealing is all going to the poor.
Yeah, right.
As a matter of fact, I guess I would argue that the vast amount of what's stolen goes to the rich.
Well, I've read a man's work. His name's Robert Kiyosaki, and he's written several books on money.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah, he wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and all the other books around that theme. And one of the things he's got a kind of an off, you know, not off color, but just kind of a snarky little joke where he says what the golden rule is. You know, for most of our Christian listeners, the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But he says the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you know, there is a lot of truth to that, because if you've got money, a lot of times with money comes influence or power. And so if you've got power to move money, a lot of times you move it where you want to move it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So,
you know, so if we think, we, the working people, okay, if we think a government that steals from the rich to give to us or the poor is a government that's doing things to our advantage, we're wrong. We're just wrong.
yeah.
And, you know, I've said this a lot. Well, let me first of all quote some wisdom from a man that I found through the years, and as I've gotten older, thought more and more that he was a very wise man. And he was Roger C. Fuqua, and he was my father. And he once told me, he said, you know, Charlie, if a rich man says he's going to use your money to help the poor, you just better believe there's more in it for the rich man than there ever is going to be for the poor.
Yeah.
And I think he was probably right in that. And so he was specifically talking about Ted Kennedy, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Ted Kennedy always cared about the poor.
Yeah.
But somehow Ted Kennedy always used your money to help the poor, and he just got richer and richer. So, but there's truth in that. A rich man that says, you know, you need to help the poor,
Right.
there's a motive behind this.
Yeah, right.
And I want to say something else, and this is wisdom I got from that same wise man. He said, you know what? When the parasite kills the host, the parasite then dies. And that's where we are. That's where we are in the United States. We're almost to the point that the parasite is about to kill the host. You know, we're to the point that only about half the people in the United States pay any federal tax.
Yeah.
And about half the people in the United States get a check from the government. Now, at some point, we've got too many people in the wagon and not enough people pulling the wagon.
Yeah, right. What did Margaret Thatcher say?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know where I got that. I've heard it from somebody.
Well, she said the only problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money.
And we're out.
Yeah, I mean, we're worse than out.
Yeah.
Was it $54,000 per citizen in the national debt? If you,
I think that number's wrong. I think it's
higher than
way
that.
higher. I think it's closer to almost $1 million from what I
if you
recall.
kick in the unfunded liability,
I think it's close to $1 million per when you're born.
Yeah, the minute you're born.
Yeah, you've got $1 million debt on you of government debt.
I want to read a quote from Alexander Tytler, who was a professor in the 1700s in the United States. I think he was in the United States, but he wrote a paper called The Death of the Republic. It's a very popular quote. And he says this: a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. And now I know some of our listeners are sticklers about the fact that the United States of America is a representative republic, so let me clarify
It's
that.
a democratic republic, actually. Yeah.
So it can only exist, this form of government can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury.
Largesse.
Largesse, yeah. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years, and I think he's talking about democracies there. These nations have progressed through this sequence, from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, from dependence back into bondage.
Yeah, we're at the dependence stage now.
We're getting there, for sure.
We're at least at the apathy stage.
Yeah.
And that varies individual to individual.
I mean, what happens when, let's just say hypothetically, that the Democrats are the party of bigger government and bigger benefits to the poor? Let's just say that that's their platform. And, 47% of people in the United States are dependent on the government for food. I mean, what party are you going to vote for?
But I'm going to argue with you.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think it's the Democrat Party that is for big government and dependency. I think it's both parties. Here's where I think we are. The Democrat Party tells people that's where they're at.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party tells people they're not there, but they really are. And
it's kind of like Bernie Sanders and Hillary.
Yeah.
One says he's a socialist, and one says she's a Democrat,
yeah.
Democratic progressive.
But they're the same thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, and I'm going to go into this with something I'm going to read in a little bit, but I'm not so sure I think that's why the American people are so fed up with the political establishment, career politicians that are there and want to be there forever. They want to make politics their life and their career. And all they care about is themselves. And they'll do anything to take care of themselves. And I think the American people are fed up with it. And
I think so too.
I want to read something from a guy, and every time I've come across this guy, I've really been impressed with him. And his name is Charles Koch. You've probably heard of the Koch brothers. Okay, the Democratic Party praises them as the ultimate evil on the face of the earth.
Oh, okay, so we should like them.
Well, they generally give a lot of money to Republican causes. Now, I will say this, I ran for state rep a few years ago, and their organization, and all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank on it, they came and spoke on your radio station, representatives from
Prosperity?
Yeah.
Americans for Prosperity.
Americans for Prosperity. Okay. That's their organization. I think that's the right one. Anyway, I want to give this disclaimer. When I ran, there was one Republican in the state of Arkansas that they campaigned against. And that was me.
Oh.
Okay. The only one. And they said their big issue was that they wanted to stop Medicaid expansion through Obamacare. And so the guy they campaigned for against me was a liberal Democrat that went back and was the deciding vote to get Medicaid expansion through Obamacare for Arkansas. Okay, just give that little disclaimer there. So I've got some discontent with the organization.
Okay.
Okay, but by and large, they seem to do the right thing. Now that could have been done by some local person that just, for some reason, decided to do that. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I have no way to know. Okay? But those that are the powers that be have always despised me.
Yeah.
Okay? And it could be because of my position on banking. I don't know. But anyway, this is a quote from Charles Koch. And he's talking about Bernie Sanders. Okay? He says, the senator, Bernie Sanders, is upset with a political and economic system that is often rigged to help the privileged few at the expense of everyone else, particularly the least advantaged. He believes that we have a two-tiered society that increasingly dooms millions of our fellow citizens to lives of poverty and hopelessness. He thinks many corporations seek and benefit from corporate welfare, while ordinary citizens are denied opportunities and a level playing field. And then here's the last sentence from Charles Koch. I agree with him. I couldn't agree more. I think that's exactly where we are. We have a system that steals from one group of people and gives to another. Now, it steals from working class, middle class Americans to give to the poor so they can buy their vote to stay in power. It steals from working class, middle class Americans and gives to the rich to buy their campaign cash so they can stay in power. That's the system we have in the United States. And it stinks. It's terrible.
Yeah.
You got any comments on that? Or?
Well, I just think about how to reform that system. How do you get into something like that and blow, like you're kind of like the whistleblower guy? You got to say, hey, this is what's really going on. And it's, if it's mainstream thought, and it obviously is, to communicate the concept, that's not very challenging. But to reform it where you don't adopt some other worse system,
Yeah.
you know, that's why I'm kind of thinking. I'm quietly pondering that. You know, how do we fix this?
I think I started to say this, and I may have gotten sidetracked, but I think we need a state and a federal law that says no governmental entity shall give any money to any other governmental entity. You know, like.
So what about like corporations?
Well, and that too. No governmental entity shall give any money to any private corporation. Now, here's got to be the exceptions to that. Say I'm selling the government something. You know, the government needs, for example, a computer system. Well, obviously the government's got to buy the computer system. But it shouldn't be, and I'll give you the most egregious example I can think
like
of.
a $500 hammer?
Well, no. Solyndra.
Yeah.
You know, most people know this is this green energy company that was created by some of Obama's buddies just to scam the government. They were given
solar panels, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to make solar panels.
I don't know, I don't remember, but they were given probably millions of dollars.
I forgot the number.
Maybe more than millions. Okay? And then they went bankrupt and basically stole the money, and the taxpayers are left holding the bag, and there's nothing to show for it. And it was all just a scam to give people who would give large campaign contributions to Democrats and to Obama. It was a way to give them money so they can do that. And it shouldn't happen. You know, what do we call a system where government picks winners and losers and subsidizes certain industries so their competitors can be put out of business? I think we call that fascism.
Yeah.
Okay? The United States...
Crony capitalism.
Well, what's the difference between crony capitalism and fascism? I'm sorry to say this, but the United States is a fascist country.
Well, Mussolini would know something about fascism.
Yeah.
And he said fascism was a joining of corporate and government entities. And what you're talking about is just that.
Yeah.
And so, I remember, in 2008 when they had the big TARP bailout, I thought, man, this is fascism. What are we doing here?
Well, what's the worst governmental private enterprise combination that steals the most from the American people? What entity do you think is in my mind right now?
Oh, the central bank.
Yeah, it's the Fed, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve. That is
eroding our purchasing power.
Yeah, that is the largest scam ever perpetrated on the American people. And do you know what most people know about it?
Nothing.
Zero. They know zero about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Fed, they kind of hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
Like the dollar bill's covered with all these Illuminati symbols and all these cultish things, and just right there.
I tell people, I say, do you know where our money supply comes from? It's created out of nothing as a debt accounting entry, loaned into existence, and you have to pay back the person that created it out of nothing at zero expense, what they created plus interest. You know what people say to me? You're nuts. You don't understand the system. But they have never spent a second studying or investigating the system. And I've spent 35 years studying and investigating. But I'm crazy.
Yeah. Well, you might be crazy because your ideas are, what do they call it, cognitive dissonance. When you say some of these things, people are like, I can't wrap my mind around that. You must be crazy.
Yeah.
But like you say, when you've spent hours and hours and hours researching these things, and you come to this conclusion, in some ways it really makes sense because it creates debt slaves out of the American people, which if you're in power, there's no better slave. And I'm going to kind of speak as maybe the devil's advocate, but there's no better slave than a slave that doesn't know he's a slave.
Yeah.
He happily shows up thinking he owns this. No. That guy that thinks he owns something will outperform the guy that thinks he's a slave. Because when the slave master's not looking, they're loafing.
Yeah.
But if you think you own that, if you think that's yours, you're going to work 10 times harder.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the bank, you know, it kind of goes back to that golden rule concept from Robert Kiyosaki. You know, he who's got the gold makes the rules. So you've got all this power and money that just says, let's stay in power, fellas. What do you think?
As a matter of fact, I've argued this for years. The reason we have abortion in America is to support the banking industry. And people go, huh, how do you make that link?
Yeah, let's connect the dots here.
Okay, well, let me tell you how you make that link. If we are so brainwashed and so stupid that we can rationalize that it's okay to murder innocent children, we can accept anything as okay. And I think that's where they've taken us. They've taken us to the bottom of the depravity pit. I don't know how much lower you can go than abortion. It's just hard for me to fathom it. You know, I mean, you can name all kinds of things, but to me, that's the bottom of the depravity pit. But if they can take us there and we can accept that, well, if it's legal, it must be okay. Right?
Yeah, that's the land with laws without ethics.
Yeah.
You know, that's the rub there. You can make anything legal, but that doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
And you know, I've thought a lot about the abortion issue. And you know, there are a lot of people that find themselves in a difficult situation, and they're not, in their own minds, they're not ready to start a family, and so they choose abortion to move on with their life. But what they're really choosing is, you know, hey, I've got maybe they have goals or dreams, or maybe they have things they want to achieve or accomplish, and a baby, it's not like Barack Obama said, you know, he didn't want his children punished with the baby.
Yeah, the greatest blessing on earth.
Yeah, well, I guess if you're not prepared for all that, it can come across as not
but
really
you can give that blessing to somebody else.
Yeah, there are other options besides abortion. And the last time I looked at any of the statistics, the line of people who want a baby is pretty long. I mean, it's not like they're oh, you know, we got plenty of babies to go around. There's a lot of infertility. There are a lot of adults, you know, who have a pretty stable home, who are wanting to adopt. I've got a cousin who went to Ethiopia and adopted a boy from Ethiopia. So I mean, the abortion issue. And really, the last thing I want to do is hurt somebody's feelings. But I mean, it really is a horrible thing. And I'm going to say this: I'm pro-choice up until you conceive a baby, and then you have to really consider that there's a human life. Yeah. You know, so if you want to.
You mean you're pro-choice? You should have the choice to have sex or not.
To not have sex. Yeah. That's your choice. Yeah. You know, if you choose to engage in sex, you have to realize that, and I guess I get it that, you know, like someone who's 12 or maybe 14 or uneducated might not know about the birds and the bees. But, I mean, today I think, hey, yeah, I think we know. You know, I think most people
know what, though? We need to educate our children about the birds and the bees.
Yeah.
and I think 12 is too late, really.
Yeah, right.
They ought to know where babies come from. I mean, you know, there's limits to exactly what you explain, but as a child grows, you explain more and more and give them, you know, little by little.
Yeah, I've had talks with my children. Oh, Dad, stop. Oh, you know, they don't want to hear all that.
But you know, in years gone by, kids that grew up on farms, you know, working with animals, they learn all that fairly young.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that we shelter our kids from things that we ought to expose them to and teach them, but then we expose them to things that they shouldn't be exposed to at the wrong time.
Yeah, I can remember a situation. This may seem real abstract, but we had a situation where there was a demonic manifestation, and there were some people there that really got scared, and they were younger. They were older teenagers, but they weren't 18 yet. Yeah. And the experience kind of scared them. And,
I can imagine.
And their parents were really mad at me. Like I had any, you know, like I
like you could control the demon.
Yeah, like I did that. You know, like I didn't have anything to do with that. I mean, so, you know, in an effort to expel the spirit, you know, there was some commotion and all this kind of thing going on. But after further investigation, the reason their child was so afraid was because of the hours and hours and hours of scary movies that they had been watching. And what we did, there wasn't anything scary about it, really, to me, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, there's no good point in watching horror movies.
No, I don't.
There's just no point in that.
When I was really young, I watched some scary movies, and I shouldn't have, but they scared me bad. But now when I watch if I watch a scary movie, I think, something really. Yeah,
but you know what? I think at a fairly
I need to take a break.
Young age, I think it's a good thing to expose children to reality. For example, the reality of beheadings and tortures and things that are going on in the world. And I think, well, let's face it, you go on in almost any church and you see a crucifix, and sometimes it depicts Christ hanging on that cross. That's a pretty ugly thing. But I think our children need to learn that the world can be ugly, it can be traumatic, and that there's evil and bad people in the world. Our children need to know that so we can protect them and they can know to be leery of certain things. But anyway, we've been talking about, I think our theme for today is that government shouldn't be a thief.
Yeah.
And government is a thief. And also, I say this over and over again, what's the purpose of government? I don't know where in the Bible the purpose of government is given any more clearly than in Romans 13. And what does Paul say? He says the purpose of government is to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior.
Right.
You know, the government was given the power of the sword to execute wrath against he that does evil. Well, now, if we're going to say that, then we got to decide what's good and evil. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, there's only one standard,
right,
and it's God's law. You know, if you're violating one of the 10 commandments, it's evil. Right? If you're keeping the commandments, that's good. And you know, we can sum those up very concisely by, first of all, love God with your whole being and love your neighbor as yourself. You know, if you're doing that, you're probably doing good.
Yeah, right. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to violate the 10 Commandments.
Right. You're just not going to do it.
You're not going to steal their car.
Yeah.
You're not going to do all that kind of
stuff. And even if you hate your neighbor, but you love God, oh, wait a minute. If you love God, maybe you can't hate your neighbor.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, if you love God and you know what God wants you to do, and part of that is not hate your neighbor, mm-hmm. Right? Right. You just can't go there. Now, we do go there, and we're all sinners, you know. But with the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, it changes us. It changes our want to. Yeah,
our wanter.
Our wanter, it changes our wanter. Okay, I wanted to get to something else today.
Can I say something?
Sure.
You were. I was taking a little break, and I heard you were talking about the world being a rough place, and I was sharing with our church Sunday about overcoming adversity, and when things go wrong, what do you do? And we spent a lot of time looking at Joseph's life. Mm-hmm. And, you think about what happened to Joseph.
He had a little adversity, didn't he?
He had a little adversity, yeah. And I don't really want to get into the whole story. Hopefully our listeners already know it. But basically, he's sold into slavery, falsely accused of rape, spent at least 2 years, or probably more than 2 years in prison. Just horrible difficulties, challenges that he went through. But the whole time he maintained, the world's a dark place. The world can be a very dark place. And I think we live in this umbrella of a Judeo-Christian heritage that is eroding under our feet. Mm-hmm. And we think, I'm a good person. I don't need Jesus and all that. Well, hey, I think outwardly you can sort of look like you're a good person, but and I just watched one of the coaches from the Oklahoma City Thunder basketball team just lost his wife, and he gave a talk that was incredibly strong. He was very very powerful. But anyway, this erosion of our morals and ethics is something that's incredibly significant, and I think every one of us, we need to be more proactive in representing Jesus Christ to our friends and our neighbors in order to, stem the tide, because we're one generation away from complete, like Alexander Tytler said, back into bondage.
I'm not sure it's a generation anymore.
Well,
we may be in that generation. I don't know. But you know what? There's a good example, and that's Europe. We are European as a nation. Our heritage is European. That's our heritage. Now, that's not to say everybody in America came from Europe, but that's our heritage. I don't think that can be argued. And that heritage is a Christian heritage. But Europe abandoned Christianity far earlier than did the United States. And I say that I believe the United States has abandoned Christianity. Now, that doesn't mean every person has, but as a nation, we have abandoned Christianity. Now, Europe abandoned it far earlier. And I think there's also an argument that the most Christian people of Europe came to the United States. I think there's an argument that can be made. But anyway, Europe is leading us by, I'm going to guess, at least 20 years in abandoning God. And it may be many more years than that. But look at Europe today. Europe is in chaos. And we can blame the Muslim immigrants for the chaos in Europe, but that's not the problem. The problem is Europe abandoned God. And when you abandon God, voids are filled by something. Right. And what we see in Europe, and I was just talking about Bernie Sanders, okay? Mm-hmm. Bernie Sanders always talks about the utopian paradise of Sweden, right? Okay, yeah. Have you seen what's going on? Sweden is hell on earth today. Yeah. Sweden is going down the sewer right now. And people are being killed and raped. And what's going on in Sweden is very bad. And it's because Sweden abandoned God. And I want to read something because I think it's really good. But I got to say this. I got a friend that said something to me the other day at pizza. And it really struck me as just real simple wisdom. And that is, the condition God wants man to be in is freedom. And I really believe that's true.
Yeah.
Christianity is all about freedom.
Right.
Now other peoples and other cultures and other religions despise freedom. They absolutely despise it. And it's because of the way God wants you to come to Him. He doesn't want to beat you down for you to, although sometimes that happens. Sometimes actually it's not God beating us down, it's what we do to ourselves, I think, that beats us down, and we finally realize, kind of like the prodigal son, what have I done? Sometimes, we got to get there sometimes. We got to reach rock bottom. It's not what God has done to us, it's what we've done to ourselves. But He wants us in freedom to choose Him.
Right.
That He wants us, it's like the love of a husband and a wife, Husbands can beat their wives into submission. What a happy home that is. It just doesn't work. Husbands are stronger than wives. Men are stronger than women, in general.
Not physically.
Yeah, physically. No, that's the only way I can think of. I'm not sure any other way they're stronger. But they can physically dominate and beat them down. And it's just a miserable relationship for both people. God wants us to be free to love Him.
Yeah, and see, like freedom too, freedom only works with self-government.
Right.
If you don't have self-government, freedom is a catastrophe. because you just move into just like Mad Max.
Yeah.
You know, you get this crazy world
Yeah.
where it's just anarchy and everything's nuts. But if people have self-government from God and they have a internal moral code or an internal moral compass that tells them this is right, this is wrong, and it really is right and it really is wrong, then you can have freedom.
Yeah.
But if that internal moral compass begins to break down society-wide,
you become a slave to sin. Isn't that exactly right?
and the other people who are smarter than you
Yeah.
will figure out how to hurt you
Yeah.
and take your stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's despotic, but that's ultimately what ends up happening. So if you want to go into parts of the world, this happens. I mean, this happens all over the world.
Yeah, it's the normal state of man.
Yeah, without Christ
It is.
to govern the character of
Yeah.
a man, his heart is sinful, and he will figure out a way to manipulate or control or hurt or harm or steal or whatever to get whatever it is he decides he wants with his sinful nature.
You know, in America, we tend to think that freedom and prosperity is the normal state of man. It's not.
Yeah,
It's not.
It's like the prodigal. You mentioned the prodigal earlier.
Yeah.
The prodigal son, the minute he left the father, he wasn't broke.
No.
He had a wad of money in his pocket, and he was completely out of God's will.
And he thought he had it made. He
But
was
he
happy
had-
as he could be.
Everything was going great.
Yeah.
He was doing the wild living thing. He was in this foreign land. He's having a big time.
Yeah.
And this lasts for a while
Yeah.
before the money runs out. Now, society-wide, it's not literal money, but it's that spiritual heritage, that spiritual inheritance. If you lose that spiritual inheritance and the moral fabric of the nation begins to break down, I mean, you know, it was said that when Fukushima happened and Japan was in total ruin, the cultural norm was very orderly, and it came from their psyche as the samurai and the warrior class and the ethics and the morals and honor and all those kinds of things were in the people. So when they were hungry, they stood in line to get food. But if you go down to New Orleans and you have the levees break, you see a different response. Hey, free TVs.
Yeah.
Hey, man, I deserve this. I'm going to go steal it. You know, get my shopping cart out and go take some stuff. So if that moral fabric breaks down, man, the clock's ticking, and I think it's ticking now.
It's definitely ticking.
Now, where does all this come loose? You know, I don't know. All it would take to really unglue America would be some kind of natural disaster, a big one, or a big economic disaster. You know, some kind of dollar collapse, some kind of EMP, something like that, and you would see a certain segment of the American people just go nuts.
Yeah.